Hello all and welcome to this short video on how I can support my son through his GCSEs. Now we ran this as a short workshop a couple of years back and it was exceptionally well received, so we started running it in March and then we started to run it in October of the year that Year 11s were doing their GCSEs. So it's a real benefit to be watching this now because there is quite a significant amount of time left for you to be able to enact some of these revision techniques and these support mechanisms that we're going to talk about today. So the key thing to start with is to say that, well, it's still in the boys' hands and that there is time. We have 208 days until the first GCSE, which I've calculated as May the 5th, which may well be one of the arts GCSEs. So it might be a little bit longer than this till your son's first GCSE, but there's still enough time for us to establish some really good habits in revision and ensuring that they're going into these exams in the best way they can. How we will support? Well, there's 3 ways that we'll do our utmost for your sons over the next 200 and so days. Generally, we have adapted lesson delivery with all pupils' reading ages to hand for teachers. We've just done some recent training on dual coding and use of visualizers, which enhances the delivery of new content for pupils and supports them in being able to actually process and understand it. And we're also, last year we collaborated as a staff and wrote the Hurstmere Way approach to teaching and learning, which again is evidence informed. And the idea about that is that we're taking current research into how we learn and how to best deliver things and embedding that within our practice. All teaching and learning resources are available to support revision through either our Microsoft Teams or our pupil area on SharePoint. I can speak for myself in that all of my music technology lessons or music lessons that are delivered are readily available in the SharePoint area for pupils that may need to recap, go over things, or in fact if they're not actually present for a lesson. We are still a member of Pixel, which is a collaboration of schools, and in that collaboration we will use their data analysis tool to target pupils, and that will inform a lot of our intervention that we put in across the curriculum. So individual subjects, so how we will support with that. We will be starting intervention soon. I believe Mrs. Smith is kind of finalising what that will look like, and that will occur generally after school. There will probably be some targeted intervention during other points in the school day as well, as we kind of as we build towards that final push. We will look at doing what's called walking, talking mocks, which are where we essentially get all the pupils into the hall and we run a mock exam where we talk through what they should be doing and train them and coach them. And it's really helpful them being in the exam hall environment to kind of experience that before it actually starts to count. We will utilise some aspects of personal development when the time comes close. Again, that time to again ramp up that intervention. And all subjects have made revision resources, including past papers. So, and then we get to the final push. So we will teach throughout the GCSE exam period, and we will have extensive revision workshops over Easter. So, and here we go. Here's an example of the resources that we'll be handing out to you. Every subject has PLCs, which are personalised learning checklists. I'll talk a little bit more about what they actually are afterwards. Knowledge organisers, which will condense all the core knowledge into one side A4 for each unit. Very useful, and that supports you with helping you in getting the pupils to revise. So step 1, and this does seem a little obvious, but I'm going to reiterate some of these core principles. it's ensuring that your son is in the best physical and mental condition that he can be. Now, during the exam period, an average of 9 hours quality sleep a night, and I think that it would be really powerful to discuss or design together a kind of programmed down routine, what that could look like for them. So limiting screen time an hour or two before bed, not having their phones underneath their pillows, although we all know that they are almost surgically attached to them. If they are regularly getting 9 to 10 hours, their brain will be focused and more efficient. Now, again, just to reiterate how important that is, they're sitting in the exam, they're given a question. The moment they're given a question, they are tapping into their long-term memory, bringing in the knowledge that they've got there and bringing that into their working memory so they can actually do stuff with it. Now, if your son is tired and hasn't had the correct amount of sleep, then that process is almost it just doesn't happen as efficiently. So them accessing that long-term memory, those strong links they've built, they just find it harder to do. So it's putting them at a detriment. Okay. So yeah, and also building in, I think it's very important that they have their time to rest and work and socialize, and they build a timetable around that. And as a collaborative measure as well. So I think sitting down with your son and not just saying, well, you just have to work non-stop, but say, look, it's really important that you have this time. Let's build this in. What seems acceptable, and then obviously pushing back if they say, well, actually, socializing is all I want to do, and I don't want to do any work. Building in some exercise as well, because that will support mental health as well as supporting their brain, again, being furthermore efficient. And also without just, ensuring that they understand GCSEs are important. That's what we are in the business of trying to achieve for them, but they are also not the end of the world, because one thing that I have seen increasingly in the last, 10 years is issues with mental health around the GCSE exam period. So it's about ensuring they understand that they are important and working hard towards them, but also not believing that their world will end if they're not successful. I think that having an honest conversation with your son about phones and phone usage is very important. Simply put, they are a generation raised with phones and social media, and as I intimated before, it's quite literally an extension of their own bodies. But they do not know how to limit their usage. And they will get lost, distracted if they're anywhere near them while they're trying to do any sort of revision. So they may try and argue that they need their phones for revision apps, but it's such a small part of their revision that I think that you can officially negate that and push back on that argument and say, look, I know Mr. Ballard and the school has said that these revision apps are a small part, and if you've got a computer, then it would be better that they use them on there. So I think recognizing that and designating phone time that they actually have would be really powerful. And I think I read somewhere that it takes, so if you are in focus time, and your phone is next to you and it goes off during that focus time, and you look at it and you respond to whatever it goes off on, then it takes something like 10 minutes for your brain to then go back into that focus time. Now, if you imagine that the amount of messages that they may receive in that means that they never really go into that focus time because they're constantly breaking that concentration. So I think it's really important to have an honest and, again, a collaborative conversation. Phones are important to them, important to their generation, but we need to know that they are a detriment to really good study, and that putting them aside for those moments of really deep focused work is integral. I think also looking at the revision environment is incredibly important, and making sure that there is a space that is tidy, quiet, that they can hone in on the material that they need to be looking at. Clutter in the environment equals clutter in the mind. This is an interesting one. To music or not to music. Now, there is growing evidence that listening to music while completing certain aspects of revision study is detrimental to the outcomes. And this is further heightened if you add lyrics into the mix. So if you're listening to music that has lyrics, then it will undo some of the revision that you are doing. When they are collating their notes, transferring things onto flashcards, I consider that what prep work before actual real revision happens. Then music is 100% acceptable. However, when they are moving on to the moment whereby they are attempting to memorize, retain, or think hard, then no music is important. Now, inevitably, there'll be a round of grunts as I say this, and they may well say, well, I've had this before, music helps me focus, I can't concentrate in silence. Well, unfortunately, here is the truth. All of their exams are in silence, so they simply must practice thinking in a silent environment. They must not only get used to it, but they must excel in it. So, now that we've got we've got that starting point right, let's look at how we learn and why it is useful for you as a parent to understand. So, in its simplest form, it can be characterized by this diagram. So, the brain, what happens is essentially we have our environment, and our environment has got lots and lots of stimulus in it, lots of different things that will gain our attention. So what happens is the brain focuses in on one thing in the environment. It gains our attention. So let's say that you're trying to learn a piece, or you're trying to do a piece of work, and that gains your attention. So focusing in attention on something within the busy environment. This now works its way into the working memory. Now, the working memory is incredibly limited. It can hold very little information. In fact, the research is that it holds between 5 to 8 pieces of information. Once you try and put more than that into the working memory, you become what's called cognitively overloaded, and you are no longer, it's no longer taking on any more information, and often it dumps and forgets a lot of the material that you are then trying to do. Okay? Just think about those times when you've been trying to focus on something and you've been getting frustrated because it's not kind of sitting, or you're not remembering any of it. It's because you're being cognitively overloaded and you need to take a break and then come back to it. Okay? Now, once it's in the working memory, that's then the opportunity for us to learn the material and to place it into the long-term memory. Now, this long-term memory is, if you can see, it's kind of like the lines are going off and there's no boundary. There's no definitive measurement of how big our long-term memory is. So that's quite scary, actually. The long-term memory could potentially be infinite. I don't know. Probably not infinite. But nonetheless, they haven't worked out if there is a kind of limit of what it can store. And once you've managed to transfer the information into your long-term memory, then you've got that's when you start to remember things, okay? Once it's in your long-term memory, then you can take that from so say for example, you get given a question, the knowledge you've managed to get into your long-term memory, and you look at the question, and what your brain does is it draws it out of the long-term memory and it remembers it and sticks it back into the working memory so you can do something with it. This whole cycle strengthens the links to that material in your long-term memory, okay? Now, the reason why understanding this is really important because it can help you support your son when they may be having issues with some of these aspects. Okay, so if they're having an issue actually concentrating on their environment, then you can support them in making sure that that is sorted. If they're having an issue with actually getting it from the working memory into the long-term memory, you can support them with that. If they're having an issue recalling it, then you can support them with that. So there's a variety of different things that we can be doing as a result of this, and it helps you be informed with regards to moving forward. So how we learn. So strategies at each step. So getting things into your working memory, step number 1. Dual coding, quite simply put, is if you are processing someone talking, but you're looking at something visual at the same time, it means that it limits the stress on the working memory and you have more chance of remembering it. So an example of this is that, and the research it came from was they gave a study group a description of a bike pump and how it worked. They gave another study group a diagram of a bike pump labeled, and then they gave the third study group a bike pump and a description of how the bike pump worked, both of them together. And it was the third group that had far better retention. They remembered how to use the bike pump, how it worked, and they could answer more complex questions about what to do with it. And it was because not only did they have the written down explanation, but they then had the visual they could attach it to, and they could deepen their understanding. Okay, so that's where the research came from. So dual coding supports with the working memory. Chunking of information, taking it into really small chunks, is very, very important. Not just sitting there reading off large parts of text and trying to remember that. Taking it into small paragraphs, breaking it down into small chunks is really integral. To actually learning is how clear something is explained and presented. And remembering is when you're doing stuff with the material. So mind mapping, summarizing timelines, taking it from the long-term memory, sticking it in the working memory and doing something with it. So why is this helpful? Because it helps you identify immediate problems. You can design a timetable, rag rate himself on the topic using the PLCs, and the outcomes will then tell you where the issue is and where strategies to employ your best support for him. Rag rating will be, kind of red, amber, green. So green being, I'm really confident with this. And then you can, if your son rags himself as a green, then you can immediately employ some questions and see how he fares with that. If it's amber and he has some of it, but he might need to recall some of it, recap some of it, relearn some of it, and then go through that process. And red is, if it's red, then you really want to look at relearning the material and how you can support him with that. So here's an example. Your son says, "I just don't get this." Okay. When planning revision, Sonny has given himself a red for his understanding of factorizing equations. His issue might be in the learning. So working memory, you might need to go back and support him with some of these aspects. For his revision, he should use GCSE Pod because that goes over the material again in small chunks. Go back through his notes and relearn the material via revision guides, online support. Okay, so if his issue is I just don't get this, he's having issues in stage 1 actually learning of the material. We need to get it from his working memory into his long-term memory, and so we should be looking at going back through his notes and relearning the material. I understand the idea, but find it hard to remember which ... When planning revision, Gary has given himself an amber for his understanding of factorizing equations. So his issue might be he's got some of the content in his long-term memory, but actually bringing it into his working memory and remembering it is where he might have an issue. So it's getting him to mind map, summarize timelines, retrieval, going back over the material and then trying to retrieve it and spacing it out in time. For his revision, he should be using GCSE Pod once again to just go over material, but rather than relearning it, because we're saying that he's got some of this, then we're mind mapping, sequencing, and we're going over processes rather than relearning. So that's important that you can distinguish between the two. Breaking it up, going to something else, and then coming back. So that spacing is important. If you space properly, then you're going to build stronger links to the stuff that you're trying to get out of your long-term memory, okay? Notes could be mind maps, timelines, cue cards, space retrieval, putting it into context. And here I've got an example of a spaced out exam planner, okay? The student I've got this, Dave has given himself a green. What can you do to check this? Well, that's the icing on the cake. That's where we want everyone to get to. And then that's when you as a parent can be asking exam style questions. You're not helping them relearn the material. You're not helping them building stronger links in their brain. You're helping them in the zone actually practicing this in exam style. Transforming the information to different context. Thinking hard activities and exam prep. Now that exam style questions are hard for you, especially if it's a longer mark response. So it may be that you encourage them to do that and to then liaise with their teachers in seeing if they can have a little look at what they've done, okay? And hand on my heart, a teacher is never going to be upset with a pupil that's done extra exam questions for them to check. I mean, if I've got pupils turning up with music technology responses or music GCSE long mark responses for me to mark, I'm never going to be upset by that. So the tools. You understand how we learn. And so you set the environment up right. They're getting good sleep. They're hydrated. They're exercising. They're having a healthy timetable of socializing, playing their PlayStation, but working. You as a parent now understand a little bit about the science of how we learn. So now what does revision look like? So we have broken it down into this prep work on the left. This is, for me, your note-taking and flashcard stuff. This is important as it gives the launch pad for the revision to begin. However, please, there's a disclaimer here. Beware of your son spending loads and loads of time at this stage and claiming that it is revision, because it feels really nice. You know, they sit there and they map out these beautiful flashcards and they say, look, I've revised for 2-3 hours. And the process, yes, of putting the information onto flashcards is some form of revision, but it really isn't where the core revision happens, okay? I call it prep work. It's not active revision, and it's a common and dangerous misconception amongst pupils. So if they spend hours writing up these beautiful notes, you tell them this is prep work for your revision, not the actual revision. The upload section is where pupils are trying to capture and memorize the material. This is putting the information into their working memory and then trying to get it into the long-term memory. And they can do this by following some of these techniques. Process is where they're trying to do something more with the material. This is what I would call the deep thinking stage. It might look like comparing it with other things, transforming it into another form. So written notes in front of you may become sequences, mind maps from memory. That's what it looks like. And then the download is putting it into an exam content. So just to recap on this, we've got our prep work. This is the note-taking flashcards, collation of material. I've put music as acceptable at this point, and I've put that it's important. This is part of the process, but is often seen as revision by pupils. I've then drawn a definitive line before what I would then consider the actual revision process happening. Upload, putting it into the working memory, into the long-term memory. Process is withdrawing it from the long-term memory and doing stuff with it. And then downloading it is what this looks like literally in exam context. So them doing exam questions. Now, why this is helpful, because it can structure some of your conversations you have with your son. So you can say, right, you can show him this visual and say, right, son, what bit are you on? Are you prepping at the moment? That's really important that you prep well. However, it's not the real revision. Oh, what are you doing now? I'm at the process stage because I've felt like I've done the chunking of smaller material. I've uploaded it. I've learnt it. I'm now doing stuff with it. Or they can be practicing the questions, but you can, as a parent, say, well, you're doing this down. You're on the last stage here. You're putting it into the exam context, but you don't know the material. So, and that's another problem that pupils might think, is that they just have to do practice and practice exam questions. Whilst that's important, if you haven't done the upload and the process stage, you cannot do the questions. You have to go through each stage before you get to download and start to do that. Here are the tools to support. So they have a variety of different apps that are very, very good to support them with their revision. We are going to send a more up-to-date sheet here, which so some of the contacts aren't quite up to date there, so I apologise about that. But we've got each subject will have PLCs, which are little checklists of all the content they need to know, and your son can sit down with you and you can do a unit, and they can say, right, I'm green on that, or I'm amber on that, or I'm red on that, etc. And then we have knowledge organisers across the board, and then there's a little section on each subject area where there are top tips. So areas that they can go, YouTube videos they can go on, other resources they can access that will support them. And GCSE Pod is a fantastic resource, which for me is really useful for pupils that are like, I just don't get this, and they need to relearn that material. Again, this is an old example. Mr. Smith is finalising the revision intervention, so that will be with you as soon as possible. This is just an example. I've left it on this PowerPoint so you could see what sort of provision we did offer last year. And it's really important that you support this intervention. We did have very good outcomes this year, and part of that has been the intervention program that we've run since October. So if you have any questions about what I've discussed in this video, please feel free to send me an email on c.ballard@hurstmere.org.uk. You can also contact Mr. Smith at d.smith@hurstmere.org.uk. Thank you for your time. I'll leave you with a couple of statements that your son may say to you and what you can ask back.